Audit and Standards Committee this afternoon. Please turn off your telephones. This is a script, but I'm trying to keep off the script, to be fair. Turn off your telephones if you've got them, or turn them to silent. The meeting is webcast to the public. There is no fire test planned for today. I hope one day there is, because it could be quite exciting, but there isn't one today, so you don't need to worry about that. We will do a quick introduction of everybody that's here. I'm Mohammed Mahroof, and I'm the chair of the Audit and Standards Committee, and I'll start with Alison.
Alison Howard, independent co-opted member.
I'm Councillor McLean. I'm a councillor for Walkley Ward.
Councillor from Belbin, deputy chair of the committee.
Lewis Shin-Chen, councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don Ward.
Councillor Simon Clement-Jones, councillor for Beecham and Greenhill Ward.
Councillor Henry Nottage, member for Hillsborough Ward.
Thank you very much. We have one apology today from Councillor Brian Lodge. Exclusion of public and press. We do have one item today, which is item 10, where we will not be webcasting. And item 4, declarations of interest. If any member has any declarations of interest, please speak now. Don't think we have any declarations of interest. Thank you for that. We'll move straight on to the agenda then. Sorry, the minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes of the previous meeting, if we just go through the page by page, if we may, and if there are any issues, can people please shout out? Just here, give you a couple of minutes to just go through it quickly. Do we agree that's a true record?
There's 2 sets.
Sorry?
Are we just looking at the first set to begin with? Because there's 2 sets of minutes, isn't there?
Yeah, we're looking at both sets. Yeah, I'll give you another minute then.
It's fine, I'm fine with them. I was just checking which one we were dealing with.
If we're all fine with that, then thank you so much, and we accept those minutes. Okay. Right, we'll move on to public questions and petitions here today. I think we have Ruth, who's going to be asking some questions.
Thank you and good afternoon. I've got 3 different questions. Shall I do one at a time or?
One at a time.
Okay. I watched the discussion on the internal audit report on the Fargate containers at the last meeting, and thank you to the officers who carried this out. Firstly, watching as a member of the public, I personally didn't think the minutes captured the flavour of that discussion. So can I please request that the webcast of the meeting be kept live and available on the public system, at least until the full ramifications play out, including through to the later discussion that this committee, I believe, has planned on this issue. Secondly, I note that the committee did not agree the recommendations. It appeared this was largely because members wanted to widen the scope of the audit and take into account other factors about what happened and why. This, however, seemed to include factors beyond the remit of this committee, and I hesitate to say it also appeared to want to skate quite closely to potentially making some party political capital out of this issue. The way I sometimes understand this committee is in terms of a car. This committee is not concerned with where the car goes, how fast, nor in terms of who all the drivers might be, but it's concerned with the fitness of what's under the bonnets, the underlying mechanics. So in terms of the internal audit report received last time, you seem to refuse that responsibility for securing and providing assurance about the underlying mechanics, because you wanted, in part, to discuss and perhaps put the blame more on where the car went and who the drivers were. So I'd like to emphasise, in the way this system, as I understand it, is supposed to work, the importance of the underlying mechanics and the public interest in the committee performing its role. Overall, this committee did not give a substantive assurance to the public in that meeting that you were paying full attention to those underlying systems and how they were configured or being tuned as an important but separate basis to how things might be performed in the future. I think it's unhelpful to say that this committee does not provide scrutiny, however SIPFA describes it. It does provide scrutiny, but it is about the security of underlying systems rather than scrutiny of specific policies or events. However, I still think your terms of reference and often your agendas could be better written to draw attention to this role. It's not just about receiving report after report with no powers. And I still think there's also potential for confusion or even things falling in between spaces between this and the Governance Committee. Please can the Chair and or Monitoring Officer comment further on the important role of this committee and its powers, and also consider revising and clarifying relevant terms of reference for the new council year.
Thank you, Ruth, for that question. I do appreciate that question, and I will comment on it, but I will let the monitoring officer or David to comment first.
I think you've made a number of relevant points in your questions, Ruth. I think the use of the word scrutiny, I mean, we tend to think of scrutiny in a particular way, which is the overview and scrutiny function that the council used to have when it had an executive system. But I think you are right that scrutiny is a wider concept, and just its wider meaning does fall within this remit of this committee, because it's scrutinising those things that are within its remit. I mean, the council does, of course, have some statutory scrutiny functions that are dealt with by the Health Scrutiny Subcommittee. But yes, I think to say it never scrutinises is probably going too far, but it's the way that we consider it. I think the remits of the committees are set out in the Constitution. I will send, those will be included in the minutes as well, so we'll put those in the minutes rather than me reading them all out. I don't think there is an overlap. I think the different roles between this committee and the Governance Committee are clear when you read the Constitution, but when you just look at the titles of the committees, you might think there is an overlap. So I think that's an important thing to look at. But what I would also say is that the remits of all committees is something that the Governance Committee has within its consideration, and it is looking at doing that, and it is on its work programme, and that is something it's going to look at. So we will always keep those under review.
Thank you for that, David. And as I said earlier, thank you for the question that you did ask, because looking at the report that we're going to be discussing a little bit later on, which is around the governance statement, I was looking at the 7 principles, and one of them, which is principle B, is obviously around openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement, etc. And I think that seems fairly relevant in terms of how we respond to the request of members of the public. I really do like your example of the car. Yes, we are talking about the fact that we should be looking at how the components of that car work, which is, do the systems of this authority actually work? And that is a key function of this particular committee. Yes, there are instances where we do get criticised in this committee for straying onto areas which probably are not as well defined or opaque in many ways, that we end up debating here, and quite rightly Counsel General sometimes picks up on that. And this is not out of the fact that we are not aware of where this is, but sometimes debate leads you to that. And it's unavoidable that you don't have that sort of discussion. in terms of what you were saying, the issue around the containers has been something that's quite passionate. Members of the public have been asking questions. I can, for one, say that whenever I'm knocked on the door, people do ask that question still. Whether that's relevant to mention in this format, I do apologise if it isn't. But the question is asked, and we're members that are representing the public, and therefore we should be able to answer those questions openly. And in terms of what we've learned from LOCOG, I, for one, think that was a fantastic report, and we really ought to be more open and transparent, and that's what I'm striving to be within this committee. And sometimes, as I said earlier, there are issues that we may go on to that do not fall within the remit. And as David said, there's a learning curve happening here. I mean, other members might have a different view on this, but mine is certainly this, that there are instances where things do fall between audit and governance, whether that's by design or just by default. I, for one, want that to be some assurance around that as to where we stand. As I said earlier, there was a lot of anticipation around this report when it came to audit and standards last time. There was a lot of public concern around this and a lot of public interest in this, and quite rightly so. And that's how the passion of the members went on that day as well, which I allowed to happen because I think it is healthy debate, and members of the public want to see healthy debate, not something that is being completely sanitized when it appears at committee. And I just think sometimes it's a little bit unhelpful to say that we don't have any sort of scrutiny, because otherwise, like I said at the last committee, and I'm going to be consistent, Ruth, which is the fact that if all we're going to be doing here is rubber stamping things to go through, then the question arises, do we really need this? And I'm more than happy to talk to you about it separately as well, if you want me to. So I hope I've tried to answer some of your questions, not directly, but some of them I've tried to address as much as I possibly can.
Thank you. I appreciate the nuance. My second question... Oh, sorry.
Because some of these issues touch on governance committee as well, would it be all right if I responded on some of those as the chair of the governance committee?
Of course. I mean, I think there's a couple of members on this who are on governance committee, and as I said, this is a learning curve for a lot of us, and it would be helpful that if you could shed some light on that, and if any other members of the governance committee want to do that as well, and they're more than happy to.
Thank you, Chair. I want to say, Ruth, first of all, thank you very much for the question. I think it's really helpfully phrased, and I too like the analogy of the car and agree with the analysis of what happened in the last meeting. And I must say, Chair, I do think it is up to the Chair to make sure that the Audit Committee is doing its job. There are all sorts of things that are brought up on doorsteps. That doesn't mean the Audit Committee should discuss every single one of them. That's not because we want to hide issues or not debate them publicly or not be open and transparent, but it is about making sure that committees are fulfilling their duties and that we are discussing things in the appropriate forum, not least so that members of the public know where those discussions will be held and know how they can access them. So I do think that's important. In terms of the remits, the Governance Committee has just established a working group that is going to look at the remits of committees. There's an awful lot in scope for that, but that does include both the specific, it will include the remits of committees like this one as well as policy committees. And we will be looking at scrutiny with both a big S and a small s, if you like. And probably we need to do something around the language there just to be really clear what we are talking about. I think scrutiny with the small s can mean all sorts of things. But as you know, we've talked about the previous scrutiny committees, there is something about we do need to be able to review policies and review projects. Largely, I would say that is largely through the policy committees, looking at that level of detail, to use your analogy, where the car is going and who was driving, as opposed to here, where we really are looking at the mechanics and making sure that the processes are in place. And I also really welcome the comment you've made about things potentially falling between the gaps of audit and of governance, and I'd really welcome a further discussion on that and make sure that we're factoring that in when we're having that discussion. So thank you.
Councillor Clement-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm also on the governance committee for my sins, I think the issue for me is that I think people see, and it mentions in one of the reports we have today on governance, that the committee is a cross-party and therefore scrutiny is a role for all parties, and that obviously applies at the moment whilst we're in no overall control. But that may not always be the case. And I think that was one of the points I was trying to make, perhaps too passionately last week or last time, that you know, what is currently the case may not always be the case. I would obviously wish that a particular party was in charge, others may wish another one, but it's not a party political point to make that I think the governance committee system works best when we're in no overall control. And we take, as it were, collective responsibility. I think the thing I would just say is, you know, how does this look to the general public? You know, is it closing ranks? Is it shooting the messenger? Post-local, you know, we need to be more open, more transparent. And, you know, I think over this issue, which, you know, has caused a lot of public debate, it needs to do that. And, you know, I wanted to see, you know, where that scrutiny, for want of a better word, was going to be. And, you know, I think people aren't interested, particularly out there, in the minutiae. You know, they want answers. And, you know, I was simply trying to get the people those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Just coming back, I mean, I think our commitment to the local report is, from my perspective, is 100%. Yes, there are things that people discuss with us, and I pick up your point, Fran, that maybe we should not discuss them here, but they were general issues, and if we're not discussing them, as Councillor Clement Jones has said, the public perception is that we're trying to do something different, which we're not. So the judge, at the end of the day, are the members of the public, and I'll put it back to Ruth. Do you feel comfortable with what we've said?
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the problems with Containergate is that it may involve HR investigations, which actually much of which should probably never come into the public domain. And actually, we should be really clear about that, whether that's even on the doorsteps. But thanks for letting me come back on that.
No, thank you for that, and we appreciate that, and I think we've got total regard for the HR issues. But on to your second question.
Okay, my second question is about the annual governance statement. I am really pleased to see a new format for and rewrite of the draft annual governance statement that is now aligned to SIPFA guidelines. I think this kind of presentation provides a good basis for capturing the annual picture going forward. What I think the annual governance statement doesn't yet do is provide the governance story of the year in the sense that it might do. It's largely a starting point description of the existing governance arrangements that apply, rather than a coherent annual narrative leading into the action planning. For example, the Principles of Good Governance section could have illustrated the salient or key ways in which these principles have been relevant or applied through the year, rather than the very static descriptions given that actually could just be repeated year on year. A few big issues affecting the control environment are mentioned briefly, for example, the corporate peer challenge, street tree inquiry, and so on. However, there seems to be no discernible link between these and the subsequent action plan, which seems to focus right down on comparatively micro issues, such as the possibility of a telephone script being wrong. So this doesn't overall appear yet to lend a flow or an overall coherent narrative to the statement for the year. So please can I confirm that review and reporting improvements will continue for the annual governance statement, and ask how the review of the reporting process for the annual governance statement will work. Can I also confirm that Containergate is not mentioned because it will be in the 23-24 annual governance statement. And because of the apology yesterday for misleading the courts, can I also confirm that that will be in the annual governance statement next year, particularly the issue of how officers or a contractual document came to be changed and was then presented to the court as a fake, if you like, document, and what systems are going to be improved to help that stop that happening in the future. I also want to flag, I've got lots more detailed questions about what is described in the annual governance statement, about what this or that board is or how it works, with directors just simply signing off and ensuring that the control environments in their areas are working well and so on. But I think these more detailed questions probably not for now, and perhaps there's a way of making this kind of information more accessible through the next year. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and I'll put it across to Philip and David to respond.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, the review is continuing. We're still working with SIPFA, and that's about reviewing the actual process for the review as well. So the work that had been done was on the presentation initially of the review that had been undertaken at the start of this financial year for the look back to the previous year. The next bit of work is going to be how do we review and undertake that review for the following financial year, which is the one that's just finished, because these are always a look back. Ultimately, that will be reported back to this committee via the updates that we bring when we bring the annual governance statement for approval. Your question about what you refer to as container gate, yes, that's because this is the 22-23 review, because it's a look back. So anything that needs to be reported for the 23-24 will be in the following year, one that we're about to embark on. And if you have any, I'll take on board your points about both about a narrative of what's being done, but also more narrative of how the review's been done and the various boards and how it's been approved. And I think that's something we can look at as well. So.
And I hope misleading the courts is in the systems that apply there. And I hope the auditor picks up on that anyway, but thank you. My final question is shorter. Can I ask, please, about the role of this committee in relation to Stocksbridge Town's deal? Considerable concerns about failing governance arrangements and processes have been raised by local stakeholders, including at the relevant local area committee, but I've not seen them filter through here. And what are the audit and standards implications of the government simplification pilot for certain external grants that I understand Sheffield is part of? And how is this being overseen by members in audit and standards terms?
Thank you, Ruth. And the question again to David and Philip. I'm not aware of those concerns, but if there are concerns around that, then we should be looking at them.
I think, Ruth, if your man will get a response to these in writing to you, rather than deal with these ones today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for attending, and see you soon. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to come to audit and standards.
Thank you. You're making audit and standards quite exciting now, really. Thank you. I think we move on. Sorry, switch myself off then. We move on to item 7, which is going to be presented by Linda, which is the internal audit tracker report on progress with the recommended implementation around reports that were not of non-assurance before. So just if you'd like to just bring us all up to date with it briefly, and then we can open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report is the progress that we've made implementing the audit recommendations. Like you just mentioned, it's for the no assurance reports and the limited assurance high organisational impact reports. This report comes to you every 6 months. The last one that you saw was June 2023. And so since then, since we've discussed that one, this audit report, we had 38 recommendations that we were tracking. 42, which is 72%, have been implemented now, and there's 16 remaining that are ongoing, so that's 28%. So that is good progress, and I think, to be fair, I've had a look back for the last couple of years, and that is probably the highest percentage that we've had implemented for a couple of years. So we're moving in the right direction for that. There is one critical recommendation that's still outstanding, and that relates to Montgomery Residential Home. And we've just done a follow-up audit on there, and what we did find, there was still quite a high number of overtime that was over the hours that we was looking at, that particularly for the staff and the children. So we've left that as ongoing, but we know that there is an improvement plan and a wider piece of work looking at the care home. So we're hoping that when we look at this, it will be implemented. But work is ongoing on that. The report was taken to the Performance and Delivery Board back in January, 23rd of January, and on page 33 of the report, that gives you an outline there of the things that they commented on. But they did look at the red rated recommendations, they looked at the Montgomery outstanding critical recommendation, and what they have asked is that each directorate take those recommendations that are still red and outstanding, take them to their performance clinics to give support, but also to see how they can drive that forward, because the aim is to change them from red to green, and then they come off this report. So, as I said, that was from page 33, you'll find in the pack there. Page 35, that shows you the 9 reports that we're tracking currently, and that does give you the 58 recommendations and tells you which ones are critical and high priority. We've added 2 audit reports onto this tracker. One of them is debtor controls in adult health and social care, and one's establishment control. The details for those will be on the next tracker, so that will be when we come June, July, because the implementation date for those haven't lapsed yet, so they're not actually outstanding yet, so they'll be on the next tracker that comes to you. On page 36, now we just mentioned Fargate. Fargate update is on there, and you can see there were 17 recommendations. Quite a few of them were critical recommendations, and all 17 have now been updated and implemented. So again, positive news there that was moved forward, and that was a priority to make sure that they were implemented. And quite a lot of work has been undertaken in the directorate to move that forward. So the recommendations I'm asking for is that you note the content of the report, and then you'll see, because, like I mentioned, there's 72% have been implemented. That's actually highlighted that there's 5 reports there that can now actually be removed from this tracker because they've gone to green and they've been implemented. So I'll just list you those. That's the disposal of IT assets, software licensing, hardware asset, creditors and Fargate containers. So those, what I'm asking for is approval to remove those from the tracker. So any questions?
Thank you, Linda. Any questions? Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Just a question about the Fargate containers. It's really good to see that the recommendations have been implemented so quickly, because it's a big piece of work. I understand that part of that is because this wasn't an anomaly, it was sort of a one-off event, and that so I guess my question is sort of in relation to that, about how can we be sure it won't happen again? You know, what's been done, what work's been done to make the wider councillor aware of like the capital delivery service and the controls that are in place for these sorts of projects? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, I'm the Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services. This project was led by my team in conjunction with colleagues in City Futures. One of the major things that we did following these recommendations, had a really big staff event with senior managers back in November, where we set out with colleagues from CDS, who are the specialists in terms of project management, the approach that managers should take when they are developing projects in terms of the documentation that they need to fill and the process that they need to go through to comply with that. I mean, I think it's fair to say when we talked about systems at the beginning of this conversation, and the council does have systems in place for procurement, for budget management and control, and for capital programme management and approval. Those systems are in place. I think what's happened is that some of those systems haven't necessarily been followed to the book necessarily, and that's what's led to the situation here. I mean, we do have millions and millions of pounds worth of projects that take place quite successfully across the city, so it's important to bear that in mind. So in terms of those processes, it was important to emphasise to staff what they needed to do, and they've had that information. We're also going to make sure that the intranet is updated, so it's much more easily accessible for staff to be able to access those documentation, and to make sure that, as a rule, they should use the specialists in CDS who are the specialists to deliver these projects all of the time. So that's important to get that message across. Equally with the financial regulations, financial regulations, are no different necessarily in this council to compare to other councils. They're quite standard, I think. But what we have done is, again, I've circulated all of those documentation to my managers to make sure that they are informed of that. And as a part of the piece of work which has been highlighted in the report, we'll make sure that that is cascaded to, excuse me, to other parts of the organisation as well.
Councillor Tinchley.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it just builds on the previous point, actually. I suppose my main concern when reading through the recommendations was just ensuring that they're actually properly embedded in, business as usual in the council, rather than just a set of points that have been completed. It just seemed that some of them were a bit too, I think, things like the training and packs that go out to staff, I think that's important, but actually does it result in a sort of change in work processes across the council and across services? Does it change the behaviour, across those different services? And that for me is about embedment. So it's one thing to have a recommendation and to for it to be met, but to actually embed it, I think is something quite different. And it's very difficult, I think, to do that in, sort of 2 or 3 months, which is, I think, when this was sort of initiated. So I suppose my question is, how do we ensure that we actually build on what's in here to make sure that in terms of the culture and the processes and the governance and all these important issues around, with the Fargate project, but also the other sort of schemes and initiatives, how do we ensure that those recommendations are properly embedded and that we don't repeat the same mistakes again in the future?
Thank you for that question. I think it's really important to say that, there isn't a culture in the council where rules and policies are not followed. It's really important to emphasise that. This was a one-off incident on Fargate. We have a clear capital delivery management process in place. When projects are developed, they have to go through the relevant approval processes, through the committee arrangements, and there's a range of gateways that officers have to go through in terms of making sure that they are approved and then managed and tracked. So I would say, that system is in place. What's happened is that in this particular incident, that wasn't necessarily followed for a whole range of reasons that this committee has been notified of previously, and I don't want to necessarily repeat that here. But what we will also do is that we will monitor those as a management team in our service area on a regular basis, and it's important to emphasise that it's not just in this service area, it's across the council. I'm also proposing that we can do some regular sort of deep dives, if you like, in terms of some of the projects that are ongoing, and we could potentially include those as part of our directorate internal audit programme as well, so that there's another level of assurance that we can provide to that, and making sure that directors and service managers also, as part of their normal appraisal and PDRs, they're looking at reviewing those as well. So there's a whole range of other things that we can do aside from reporting to these particular committees as well, and we'll make sure we undertake that.
Councillor Nottage.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to echo Councillor McLean's comments about the implementations being carried out so quickly, and commendation to everyone involved in that. My actual question is pretty quick. Are there any projects that are ongoing that have been migrated over to CPS? So we've got a new set of processes to make sure things that come online go through a different set of structures. But do we have anything that's currently ongoing that isn't going through CDS?
We have lots and lots of capital projects in the council, and I haven't gone through that list, but I would expect all of them to go through that CDS process. But we have undertaken to look at any that might be missing, and we'll make sure that we review those and take corrective action.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks. Just sticking initially, at least with the containers audit report, and again, great that we have met all those recommendations. I think when we had the discussion last time round, I did raise an issue around how can we as councillors be assured in the future in terms of the evidence that is presented to us, to make sure, if you like, that going back to Ruth's analogy about the internal mechanics and how that's working, what's on our MOT certificate, if you like, so that we can really judge that when we're looking at these projects, whether it's at that initial stage, when they're going as reports to councillors for approval, which might be a policy level or a project level, that councillors have got the evidence they need, that they are making robust decisions. So it's fantastic, and I've every confidence that, you know, yes, you're following fantastic processes, but I think, you know, what we are required to do as councillors is to see evidence that that's happening. So I appreciate that's kind of not within the internal audit recommendations and wouldn't expect it to be, but I think there's a bit of a question for me about how that is followed through, and that might have an impact on how reports are written, etc. And I just want to be clear how that issue is picked up and then followed through. Maybe it becomes a recommendation on the annual governance statement, I don't know, but something like that. But it's just how would that follow through?
I'll probably let Linda come in a minute, but I think, you know, all of the projects are going through the committee system. They are reported to the Finance Committee in terms of progress. They report to the Finance Committee if there's any variations, any overspends, if there's need to be sort of corrective action that's been taken through that. So the detailed report that goes through that process. We also make sure we take them to the relevant policy committees as well in terms of progress being made. And I think in terms of, you know, assurance, there's different levels of assurance. I think internal audit is one level of assurance. External audit is another level of assurance. And I think you as members, when you're challenging and looking at those, that's another level of assurance. And clearly we have those management assurances that I've described to you that we need to make sure that things don't go through the net. So there's a whole range of different levels, I think, within that process that should satisfy members, hopefully, that, you know, we are taking this seriously and recommendations have been implemented.
If I can, and it might not be a question for you, Ajman, it might be more aimed at David or around the governance and so on. I think I appreciate that, but I think we did have a bit of discussion last time about improvements to reports that go to committees, and still don't feel quite clear where that's going to be followed up on really, or you know, whether that's part of the risk audit, the audit process. I mean, I think obviously, yes, we do have those levels of assurance, but as I say, I think that particular project, when it was approved, was through an urgency committee and it was really rushed through. And I don't think there was really much assurance provided to councillors at that stage to say, well, yes, this is a good project or a bad project or whatever. And I can imagine us getting into a similar situation. So what evidence should we expect to see as councillors, and how is that going to impact how that evidence is put towards us, what reports look like in the future? You're nodding, Linda, so I might ask you to reply, or David.
I know there is an overall governance review, isn't there, that's been commissioned, so I don't know if you wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Yes, we have got somebody looking at what I shall call the sub-constitutional governance, those arrangements for how things get to committees and the arrangements for that and the oversight of that. So that should be able to pick some of that up. What I would say is that policy committees are the committees that are there for effectively commissioning capital projects and deciding whether they are a good idea as it was, so there's that oversight there from members. And Finance Committee is the committee that then keeps a monitoring on that. And having attended Finance Committee, I know that there are regular questions asked by Finance Committee members about individual projects, and so that they do have that robust checking there as to how the progress of capital projects are going.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Clement-John.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, so my questions on Fargate containers was going to be around the wider implications, but I wanted to talk about the report on Montgomery. The kind of sense I get from this is perhaps management aren't taking this as seriously, perhaps as they ought to, or as urgently. It does seem to have taken a long time, and it doesn't seem that you know, progress has necessarily been made as quickly as we'd like. You know, is it a case of cooperation? Is it a case of resources? You know, what is it that's meant this is dragged on?
Yeah, when we were doing the follow-up review, to be fair, there was a change in staff, so in leadership, so that has had an impact on it. But what they've done now is, like I said, they've got an implementation plan, so they are starting to go through the recommendations. But what they do need, a lot of it evolves around the overtime, so it wasn't just, it was looking at the rota and the staff to children ratios. So there was quite a bit of work that they needed to do on that before they could start reducing those levels of overtime. So it wasn't far enough for us to say it'd been actioned fully, so because we still found instances of quite high overtime rates. So yeah, it is ongoing and there has been delays.
And is that due to the new management? Oh, sorry. Do you have more confidence that this is going to be done due to the new management, or was that just you know, happenstance that they happen to be changing in management?
Yeah, no, the new management that come in, we've got confidence with them. So, and they knew where they wanted to get to. They just hadn't got there yet. So we did have confidence in what they were telling us and where they wanted to go. So, but those recommendations will stay. So hopefully in 6 months, like I say, we should see a lot more progress then. And they have got the support if they're taking it to that, like I mentioned, the performance clinics. And then they've got to report back to performance and delivery. So we should see that push there as well and support to them. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? No.
Sorry, it's on there. I wanted to ask about the FOIs and SARs as well, which are still, again, showing us orange and red. And obviously, again, this is something that's taken some time. I do note on a couple of the reds there that it talks about considering a case management system and talks about implementing some IT systems to improve how we're doing this. It kind of feels, given how late we are, that feels kind of essential. And why are we still at the considering stage rather than the, I'd have thought, given how far behind we are, that we'd be looking at implementing something by now rather than still considering.
Yeah, I'll pass that comment on to Sarah Green, who provided these updates. And I know she brings a separate report, doesn't she, to this committee. So I'll mention that to her, and then, yeah, the thoughts. And she can include that in the next report. But, yeah, it's a fair comment.
Thank you, Linda, for that. I think there's been quite a comprehensive debate around the Fargate containers, and I'm encouraged by what's actually happened thus far. But there are a few administrative issues that I think I need to clear up within this committee, because at 9.21 of the minutes, going back to the minutes, David, where there was going to be a deep dive report into the Fargate containers issue. Is that being replaced by this report back, or is that one that's going to be, because that was the recommendation of this committee previously, that it would come back here again? I've just got a little bit confused. That is that report what we received today, or is that something that's going to happen again?
This report has given you an update. So this report has given you an update on the recommendations that were outstanding and now been actioned. So I think that is giving you sort of some assurance that things have progressed and action's been taken. So I wasn't sure whether or not the deep dive you mentioned was the other commission piece of work, but like I said, we've mentioned that about the HR issues, which aren't really for the discussing at this meeting. So
all I'm doing is trying to clear up on what we agreed last time, which was the recommendation was that deep dive report would be brought back to audit and standards. The Chief Operating Officer said that would happen, and I'm just trying to clear that up, whether that is actually going to happen, or aside with the HR issues, I'm more talking about the procedural issues here.
The deep dive was the HR report, so that wouldn't be coming back here in the public forum.
That's the clarity I was actually looking for, because otherwise that remains an outstanding recommendation. Councillor Clement John.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to extend this, but I mean, for me, it was more around the governance, not. As I say, I think that the HR issues and the issues around that were fairly extensively covered in the report. It was the wider issues, and it's as I say, I'm just wondering where that is going to come, and I say that's where the public interest, I think, is in this issue. and, you know, where can they expect to get those answers, if you like.
Sorry, Councillor Clement-Jones, I'm not clear at all what you're asking for. What do you mean, the general governance issues? That's really vague to me.
I mean, I think, you know, the issues around the politics and the politicians, I think, was, you know, is the way I'd put it. You know, as I say, it was around the HR issues, which is, you know, around how this happened from an officer point of view. It's how it happened from a political point of view. You know, the questions I asked last time were around why were the people who were, you know, ringing the alarm bells ignored? Why didn't the people who were supposed to be scrutinising this, how come they didn't either know or understand what was going on, and why they weren't asking those questions? You know, did they not know, or did they not care? So I think, and that's as I say, it's, obviously this is maybe not the right place to ask that, but I'm not getting the sense of where we and the public are going to get those answers. Thank you.
David?
What I would say is that no review has found any evidence of any inappropriate political interference or inappropriate political action. And therefore I don't think there's anywhere to go in relation to that, because that has not been founded. With regard to any lessons learned, wider lessons learned, if there was to be a wider lessons learned, that would go to the appropriate policy committee, which would be S&R for this.
And I'm not saying anything was done wrong by anybody. I'm asking, you know, why, you know, the political controls we have did not work in this case. And I have no answers for that currently as to why those who were supposed to be overseeing this, scrutinising this, call it what you will, didn't either listen or know. And that's what I don't know at the moment.
Councillor Belvin?
I think David has already answered that question. The people who should have been given oversight of this project were the members of S&R, which was a cross-party committee at the time. Now, I understand that this was during the transition period, and it may not have been obvious to all members of S&R, perhaps, that they should have been paying this amount of scrutiny, but I think that's where the responsibility lay. I do think that the ins and outs of what have happened have been explored in a lot of depth, though, and that you now seem to be asking rather circularly, going back to what we've already discussed at the start of the meeting around the purpose of this committee, around the purpose of other committees in providing scrutiny. Now, if S&R want to go back over this, I'm sure it's up to members of that committee to take that and suggest they want to go back over this again. Then I'm sure they can request that. But I do think we've kind of responded to this already, and you're kind of trying to make political capital again, quite frankly, Councillor Clement-Jones.
Sorry, I don't want to labour on this much more longer than this, because I think we've got other items on the agenda as well. But I do want Councillor Chinchin to come in, because he's just raised his hand.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll be brief. But I think one of the main things that one of the main roles of this committee is to look at whether the mistakes that were made with that particular project have extended into other projects and across services. Because for me, if that is the case, then that is a fundamental risk to the council's operations, and that's exactly what is in the remit of this committee. So it's not just, I don't think it's about dwelling on mistakes that were made on this particular project. And it's not even about that this project failed. What it's about is that it failed because the right procedures weren't followed. And the question is, were those procedures not being followed on other projects? And is there therefore a fundamental risk to the council that this committee needs to be aware of?
Thank you, Councillor Chinchin. Basically, where we're at the moment, I just need some clarity from my left here, which is that there was a resolution which said that deep dive report would come back to this committee. Are members saying that they don't want it to come back to this committee? Because I'm being democratic about this, because we did do it democratically last time, which said that we would bring it back here. Are we now saying we won't bring it back here? Sorry, before we answer, Councillor Nottingham.
Thanks. One of the benefits of being a new member is the words of the SIP for trainers are still ringing in my ears about the specific role of audit and standards as an apolitical part of the council. And it seems that we keep on veering off either into an HR issue or into a political accountability issue, neither of which are the remit of the people in this room. I understand that the public want those questions to be answered, but if we could just confirm which political committee should be responsible for having that discussion and move it there.
That's the question I asked.
David?
I'm going to echo what Councillor Notty just said, that the deep dive, and you'll remember that this was raised and we were discussing this as we were going along, the deep dive is the HR. There is no other deep dive matter to bring back before this committee, and it's not appropriate for the HR matter to be brought to this committee. So there is, the minutes reflect that it was going to come back, but I think that was as a result of how the discussions went on the day and that they were in the moment rather than considered, in that it was said that members could be updated as a result of that, but it should not have been said that that deep dive report would come here. The political accountability is a matter for the electorate and the politicians. It's not a matter for any reports brought by officers to any committee.
Thank you, David. I'd like to bring this to a close, really. So the conclusion is that it wouldn't be coming back here. It would be going to the relevant committee because of the issues that are behind it. So I think I'll just conclude on that one, unless you...
I was just going to suggest, Chair, if we're all accepting that's the case, perhaps we could retrospectively agree to note the report as we were initially asked to last time, and which, as Ruth pointed out, we failed to do last time, so that we have tied up all the loose ends around that report.
I think, just coming back to you on that, Councillor Belbin, I think it was relevant that we had that discussion, and it's quite important that we have those discussions in open public, and I'm proud of the fact that we did, to be perfectly honest, whatever the ramifications in terms of procedure, etc., because it's of public interest, and as any taxpayer, they will want this to be debated. We are concluding here that the report will not be brought back here. That's number one, and it will be sent to the relevant committee, as David has outlined to us. And as much as it, I don't really like this business about bringing reports here, noting them, stamping them, and letting them go further on. But if that is what our remit is, then that's what we've got to do. So if everybody's happy with that, then that's what we'll do.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's rubber stamping things. I think the report itself sets out the audit findings, the recommendations of those findings, and the update report has said that those recommendations have been followed through. So unless members think that's not correct, then by noting it, it is approving and agreeing that those have been taken place and noting that. I don't think there's any rubber stamping. That's why officers have been here to answer questions with regard to those matters if members wanted those questions. I just clarify that it would be a matter for S&R whether it wanted a report. It will be a matter for S&R whether that report goes on it, and it will consider that itself.
Thank you, David. I hear what you're saying, and I think we'll move on from that. On to annual governance statement, which is you again.
It is.
I don't think I've got the correct name, but I think people know who I am. Can I also introduce Said Rizzi, who is business manager within legal services, who assists with this, and he will be part of the presentation as well. So, and can I just start by saying that even if it's only partial, having the approval of Ruth is a step forward, I think, for this. So the annual governance statement is part of the accounts process. It's a legal requirement under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015. Under that, as a council, we must have a sound system of internal control which facilitates the effective exercise of its functions and the achievements of its aims and objects, ensures that the financial and operational management of the authority is effective, and includes effective arrangements for the management of risk. We're required each year to do a review of that system, and that review is then done as a report, and that report is the annual governance statement that you have before you today for approval. This is a look back, so we're now looking at 22-23, and in answering some of Ruth's questions, that explains why some of the things are not in here. And it's a document that supports the accounts, which for that year have yet to be audited. A draft of the annual governance statement was published in June with the draft accounts, and as we've already said, it's been updated with the work with SIPFA to improve the presentation, but the contents remain as part of the work that we did before, although we are going to review that process. Before I hand over to Syed, who will just update a bit on the process that we go through for that review, I would just say that I am questioning with SIPFA who the appropriate signatories are in this. I think it's right that the Chief Executive sign it. They've currently advised that it should be the leader. I'm not as sure as they seem to be that in our committee system, the leader is the right signatory to this. If this was the accounts, it would be the leader, sorry, it would be the chair of this committee. And so my one caveat to, if you do agree to approve these, is that I'm just looking to clarify with SIPFA who the appropriate signatories to this document should be. Unlike the accounts, it's not a legal requirement to have a signature, but it is a recommendation of SIPFA within their guidance. So,
yeah, Syed Brisby, Legal Services. So what we do for this is, if you're looking at page 77 of the AGS Annual Governance Statement, is there's that diagram, and it's one part of that is a director's assurance. So what that entails is we've got pro forma set up for every single service in the council. So around about 20 of them. That's quite well established. We've got good buy-in from that, and that pro forma asks each service, specifically each director, are they compliant with certain things in the Code of Corporate Governance? And the way we've done it is you're either compliant or you're non-compliant. That's that one element. What we also do is then we've got the internal and external audit assurance where we liaise with them, and then we've got the monitoring officer who sits in that as well. So we have all the opinions around the table in terms of what good governance is, what our control weaknesses are, what our strengths are. But as the AGS, we're particularly focused on the weaknesses. We then have a shortlisting exercise. So after each director has submitted their pro forma or submission, by the end of the financial year, we would essentially shortlist those into a rating of severity. The lowest being this is an isolated incident or issue, which we feel the service and that director can deal with, all the way up to, okay, this is a pattern or theme, or there's multiple issues that are arising, and we then recommend those going into the AGS, and then they're the ones that you'll see towards the end of the document in terms of these are the major control weaknesses.
thank you. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Syed. Any questions from members? Observations? Anything?
Yeah, I've got a question. Yeah.
Councillor McLean?
I have got a question, but you've also just answered the question, because it's about how the governance issues were selected for the report. You know, or are there some that aren't in there and how they're chosen, which you've literally just sort of answered. But is there, within the controls, not the controls, within the issues that have been identified, and I'll put in the AGS, there doesn't seem to be like a level of priority attributed them, like some, you know, they're not in like order of priority, for example. Is that something that the AGS should consider, or is that not sort of sit for, so that say that's not a priority to sort of present it in that way? Does that make sense? I hope I've been clear.
Yeah, we don't prioritise them. They are, in a way, because they've reached here, they're all a priority for us to address. But we could look at within them whether there's any that need to be prioritised over others. We'll consider that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Belbin?
I just wanted to ask about the new accountability framework that's mentioned within this, which says that it'll be a means by which services can more easily monitor compliance. And I just wondered if you've got a bit of an example about how that might work and how far we are with implementation of that.
The work is ongoing with the new accountability framework. Personally, I couldn't say where exactly we're at and when it might be ready, but that will be something that will be rolled out across the whole of the council, to make sure that everybody's aware of that framework, and then how that framework will be monitored, and the controls that we will have to make sure that the framework's adhered to.
And I do think, I suppose it's going back to the question that Ruth asked at the beginning and Laura's question about how, I can see what you're saying, Ruth, that it doesn't feel there's quite a natural flow through, if you like, of the issues raised in the report and the recommendations. I appreciate this is ongoing improvement and so on. I'm happy to sign this off today, but I think it is something we do need to think about for the future, that it does read as if it's not just picking up a list of actions from last year, and it doesn't feel terribly clear, and I appreciate the system that's in place, but I can see, yeah, having a better flow to the document is something we can work on.
Yeah, and I think we can work on that, and I think this isn't just the same as, well, some of the things in there are the same as last year, but it's not just a cut and paste. This is a full review, and it is considered each year. But I do take Ruth's point that some of these things are a bit down in the weeds rather than just looking at systems of governance. So I think that is something that we can pick up for future years.
Is that something potentially that we could invite a bit of stakeholder input to as we're working on it for next year?
There's a time frame for getting this work started to ensure that we can get the draft out with the accounts, but yeah, we can discuss that.
If there's no further questions, thank you, David, and thank you, Saeed, for bringing this and the work you've done on this. Thank you so much. Councillor, not so sorry I forgot you there. You just...
Well, being clear enough in my hand and where, thank you, Chair. Very quick one. Where we've got governance issues that are identified as being newly identified, is it because they have not been an issue before, or because we've not looked for them before?
Do you have a particular answer? Because it might depend upon...
It's slippage in business improvement plans. From looking at previous council budgets, it's quite often identified that budgets haven't balanced because BIPs haven't been deliverable. But it says that it's a newly identified issue for 22-23. Is that because we've suddenly started missing BIPs? No.
I think that around that time there was a greater focus on it, so I think that's why it's found its way into the annual governance statement.
Thank you. Any further questions from anyone? No? Thank you so much again. We move on to the work programme now, Chair.
Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I think we need to approve the AGS formally.
Formally. I assumed it had been there, but yes.
Wouldn't want there to be any governance issues on the actual AGS itself.
We are approving it. There you go. Unless there's any objections. There aren't any, David. Thank you.
Chair, there's nothing in particular I need to draw to members' attention. So just over to members to approve the programme and identify any other items they wish to include or take off or move around. Thanks.
I haven't got anything unless anybody else has got anything. Thank you, that's fine. I think that concludes that item. We move into item number 10, which is strategic assessment, strategic risk management and health. And this is an item which is not being broadcasted.